Welcome to 5 Big Questions. I'm Angela Morabito with Campus Reform, and today, Veronique de Rugy of the Mercatus Center is here to discuss illiberalism in higher education. Veronique, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
So as you write, cancel culture has touched every part of universities, from students to faculty, college presidents. Where would you say we should start in breaking that pattern?
So I think one of the places you want to start is by restoring as much as possible the culture of free speech, because ultimately culture is upstream of rules, either the one passed by Congress or even the one that are actually kind of implemented in universities, right? And while in private universities, there's an understanding that actually they are allowed to suppress speech in some ways, right? There's always been also an understanding that there are some great things that come out of the ability to debate ideas, even controversial ideas, minority ideas, offensive ideas, and that this culture was really kind of, or that universities actually was really a place where these ideas could be debated more than anywhere else. And that's changed. And so I think kind of restoring the culture of free speech, which that means obviously having strong leaders that say that here we will respect free speech, we will be open-minded with one another, we will engage in debate as opposed to suppression. I think that this is the way to start, the place to start.
One of the things we've seen at Campus Reform is how speech codes started on college campuses, and now we're seeing them in places like the CDC. What do you make of that trend?
So there's a really wonderful book that people should read called The Cuddling of the American Mind by Jonathan Haidt and Greg Lukianoff. And so where the author talks about is how it is true that in the past on campuses, what organization and free speech litigators were mostly concerned with is protecting students and faculty against those speech codes implemented by administrators. And what they've seen since 2013 is a shift with students demanding actually protection against what they considered offensive speech. And what is interesting is that for the longest time, people thought, well, once this spreads outside and when these kids grow and go into the marketplace, they'll be taught, right? Employers are going to be, we're not putting up with this, and instead, this is not at all what happened. We've seen it actually spread. This intolerance for some ideas, and even though it's not where it's pervasive, is like, well, it's still not, sanctioned by rules. What you see is people like basically like not talking, and that's really everywhere, absolutely everywhere. And it's been kind of a fascinating kind of trend to look of this thing that started really on campus and that spread outside. I mean, against all expectations that this would happen. And now it is really pervasive everywhere.
It is happening everywhere and on both sides of the political aisle, although absolutely. I would say not quite evenly, but it is everywhere, as you said. And in your piece, you argue that neither the political left or the political right has the answers for fixing illiberalism in higher ed. Why is that?
Well, actually, it's worse than this. They think they have the answer, but they don't. And very unfortunately, well, actually, let me rephrase this. Like the very vocal groups within each party think they do, but they don't. There are forces outside of these vocal groups that actually are arguing for a return to the culture of free speech and a respect of liberal values. But unfortunately, right now, they're not the one prevailing, really. And so I think it's because they're trying to, like they feel, each group feel oppressed by the other. And let's be honest, right? Isn't it easier if someone bother you to silence that person rather than actually engage and expose the fallacies in what that person is saying, right? And that's unfortunately, there is just kind of, it is this, people are forgetting that one of the reasons why we like free speech, it's not just that it's a liberal value and it's a it's one that breeds tolerance, but it's also one that creates knowledge, right? It is this exchange and the clash of these ideas against one another that allow to weed out the really terrible ideas, but also create knowledge and create, it's the like sometimes people learn from one another, and people observing the two sides will say, you know what, neither of them are correct. I think the correct answer is this one. And it is, the production of knowledge is actually lost in a world, in an illiberal world.
It ultimately just harms the education that everyone is receiving. And look, test scores don't lie. We're seeing that this rising generation just doesn't know the basics of history and civics. The nation's report card info just came out. It's pretty devastating. Do you think there is a policy answer to this so that we're graduating people who are prepared to be informed and productive citizens?
So I don't know really of the best way to change the content of what is taught. And here I assume we're not talking about high school. We're talking about high school and K to 12 as opposed to college. But this matters because these are the kids who end up going to college. So I don't exactly know how you change the content. This notion that, I mean, it's a harder question. One of the things that I know is the best way to get the highest type of quality education is to give parents choice. And you give parents choice by allowing them to pick the best education for their children. Higher income parents have that choice. They can put kids in private schools. Not that it's a guarantee that they will be taught civic education, but at least it will reflect you would think that the parents only agrees to pay because it actually, they feel that their kids is getting the education their children need. But then another way is to authorize more and more school choice options. And that means the federal government gives significant money for public schools. And instead of giving it to the schools, this should be given to parents, either in the form of cash to spend in whatever school they want, whether charter, whether private, whether, like Christian schools, whatever they want and feel their kids need. They could be vouchers, it could be tax credits. They're all different ways to do this. But what matters is to empower parents. You empower parents to choose and to behave as consumer. Public schools that are right now failing kids will have no choice but try to cater to parents to attract their kids. Otherwise, they won't be getting any money.
It's a free market of education, just like we talk about the free market of ideas. That,
well, not really, by the way, because it's public money, right? So to all people who are saying that somehow, allowing school choice is, sure, some of that money would go to private schools, but a lot of the money would actually go to public schools, and it would be paid for with taxpayers' dollars. What you do is you design the system as to change the bargaining power and put the choice, just in the hands of parents. So it's creating a sort of market incentives within a system that actually remains, a public system.
I saw firsthand at the Department of Education that when parents have a choice, plenty of them will either choose to stick with their current public school or go to a different public school than the one their kids were zoned for. But we've got something here. Parents are such an important piece of this.
Yes.
Even as students go off to college. And you're right about your eldest daughter, who's just starting that journey. What do you think the main differences are between the college experience that you had and the college experience that she and this rising generation will be getting?
So I did not go to school in the US. I went to school in France, and it was radically different, really, really different. So it was very different. But from what I hear and I read from my friends, is like this notion, right? So I would have gone to school in the 80s, this notion that that words were violence, that silence was violence, that this would not have existed. It's also worth saying that in the 1980s, this is when free speech litigators started winning over and over and over again. Another victory for viewpoint neutrality is another way basically to talk about free speech on campus, which is that if you allow, let's say, the use of library for the students, the socialist students of whatever university, you should also allow the use for the Christian group or the Buddhist group or whatever. This notion of viewpoint neutrality is essential. It wasn't respected as much for religious students before the 80s. And in the 80s and 90s, a lot of court victories to extend free speech to even more groups. And so I think it would have been a pretty exciting time to be in college in the US, because there was really the place where there was really truly a culture of free speech.
The free speech movement in many ways was born on college campuses. If you think all the way back
Yes.
to the 70s,
Berkeley,
right?
In the 60s, at the end of the 60s, and absolutely.
Yes, and now it's so very different. And you raise a good point here that it's not just what people are allowed to say, it's what resources they have access to and what student clubs are able to access as part of their college education.
And if I can talk about my daughter's experience, she's really lucky that she's in a school that has been rated, green, so really great on free speech by FIRE, the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education, which Gwen Lukianoff is the president of, and they're basically free speech litigators. So if whomever is listening has a brush with the cancel culture, they need to contact FIRE, because that's what they do. They're a nonprofit. They're remarkable. And so UVA, where she is, has been great. Has been rated as great on free speech. But she and the president, gave us a talk at the beginning of the year, reinforcing this idea that they're a university that respect free speech. They've joined the Chicago statement about free speech. But she says it's quite remarkable that there are very few debates that are going on campus, either because people all believe the same or no one speaks up.
Just amazing. And you've diagnosed the issue. Veronique de Rugy of the Mercatus Center at George Mason University, Thank you so much for answering 5 big questions.
Thank you for having me.